let's talk about ray tracing. Ray tracing at 60 frames per second, no less, which we would take to mean hardware lumen, right? Which for a console at 60 frames per second is extraordinary, I'd say.
Yeah, especially given the density of the world. In a game like Fortnite, you can see how the most recent season did allow that to occur even on base PlayStation 5, which they did update, by the way, to add in hardware RT to the base PS5 there in the latest season of Fortnite. Because, if you look across that world, it's pretty scarce, and it's, written around the ability to even run on stuff like Nintendo Switch or a phone, right? The density of the world is very different in comparison to a game like this, which is a lot higher. And on the blog, going in deeper into detail about Unreal Engine 5.6 features, they do talk about how hardware lumen has now been updated to be a lighter load on the CPU, regardless of how heavy it is on a GPU, which hardware lumen typically has been in the past, at least at the high preset within the engine, a bit heavier than software lumen on the GPU, but just because it's achieving much higher detail. The CPU burden was always much higher. I think I've measured in the past when I did like a 5.4 video, like 30% or even higher when just running through a scene, while CPU limited on a PC. And it was a pretty big deal, obviously, because in a game, in an engine like this, especially an open world one, CPU is probably your main limiting factor. And that is the key kind of like breakaway technology from this demo, I would say. We've seen hardware ray tracing on the base consoles for UE5 extremely rarely. In fact, so rarely, other than the Matrix demo and the most recent season of Fortnite, I'm really struggling to see and think of any UE5 games that have really used it. And even then, the original target for hardware RT on consoles for Unreal Engine 5 was always 30 FPS. That original Matrix demo was targeting 30 FPS, and hardware RT was one of the reasons why. And here, seeing it running through an area with a bunch of vegetation, which is a typical pain point for RT, a lot of moving characters, for example. These are all pretty impressive things to see while running the hardware RT profile. Still, as I say that, the demo didn't give great clues as to how high fidelity this hardware RT is running on the PlayStation 5 here. And that isn't a slight or something like that when I say that. It's more like the demo has the camera moving really quickly with a lot of motion blur, and there's no great, it takes place in the world of The Witcher, which is medieval, more or less. And so there's not a lot of glass and polished metals and things like that, where you can get a greater sense of the areas where RT needs to be skimped on for performance purposes. So I couldn't see, for example, if all the skin characters that they mentioned at one point are included in the ray tracing structure. I would imagine that for performance purposes, they probably wouldn't be to some extent or reduced in some way. I couldn't see like the way vegetation is handled in it. Couldn't see a lot of things, but there were still some screen space artifacts that were visible on the few bodies of water that were there, as well as some general lumen instability that could be seen in a couple scenes when the camera wasn't blazing through the landscape, where it was pretty hard to appreciate anything at that point. But I would say this is really impressive, and I'm stoked to see what it shakes out like in a final game with more variability, as well as presumably larger bodies of water, which is typically the pain point for lumen RT.